Told you, Rich, 2 points to Wakefield. I didn't expect it to be that easy for you. I mean, I tipped Wakefield by 6 on the media tipping competition. Now, unfortunately, my form is much like Castleford's at the minute, or Warrington's indeed, and I'm down near the bottom of the table among some less salubrious names in the rugby league media. But
are there less salubrious names?
I know. I've been accredited for Wembley, so I've got away with that. Warrington versus Wakefield. Well, let's just start with Daryl Powell. I mean,
start with the game.
Start with the game.
Because I think you need to put Mr. Powell into context. So you were there.
I was there.
And your comment was something to do with the Warrington right-hand side.
They weren't very well. Yes, I mean it was pointed out to me by someone who's watched Warrington far more than I have this season that Wakefield just need to attack down the Warrington right, which I believe that might have been Mark Applegarth's plan. He might have had it in a big board at Bellevue. I think they can afford a board with a pen on and just go this way, go this way.
Big arrow, like big arrow, Dad's army.
That way, this way for victory. Poor Tom Lynham and Reece Lynn in the first half just stood out on the left-hand side, just nothing to do. Just had to, could have had a chat with the Warrington fans in the away end, but...
Well, Tom would know if you were there. So
he would do. And then he scored a try. Have you seen his try?
Yeah, I have seen his try.
It was like Tom Johnson, but,
the flying...
slug, yeah. Prolific. Prolific Tom Lynham. And in his senior, on his 4th debut for Wakefield,
which has got to be some sort of record.
Apparently, Paul McDermott had 3 debuts for Wakefield. So whether I don't know
McDermott name might come up again soon.
Whether anyone can beat 4 at any club, I don't know.
It's almost unheard of.
Unless someone's been on dual reg a million times in a season, but you'd have to play in between for a different club, wouldn't you? But Wakefield attacked down the right-hand side, 22-0 lead at half time.
So
that was it. That was it. That
who
was the
was
game.
at fault for Warrington?
Well, I mean, according to Matty Ashton, who was very vociferous on the other side of the pitch, wanting it to be shifted his way with a few expletives in there, the other side of the pitch. I think people who've seen the tries have said soft defending. It's one of those games where you come away from, or you stood there watching and your team is 22-0 up, and you think, we're not really being tested, we're not really done much not to deserve the lead or anything. Obviously they've worked hard, and you can tell that bringing in Luke Gale and David Fafita and those experienced names they've brought in has taken pressure off.
Funny,
Mason
Max
Lino,
Jowett being fit.
Max Jowett. Taking pressure off a Mason Lino or Will Dagger or whoever's had to play at half back. Shows you how bad the signing of Lee Gaskell was, I guess. Luke Gale comes in, he's never going to play for England again. He's not going to win Man of Steel. He's slower than he was, but he's got a brain still.
He really needs to win about another 4 games this year.
He just tells people where to stand and what to do, and if it all comes off, it works, and it's good. It was funny though when Warrington scored at the start of the second half, there's a Wakefield fan in front of me saying, "Bloody rubbish, Wakefield!" But you never got the feeling that Wakefield had to get out of second gear or anything. Which seems a strange thing to say, doesn't it? But Warrington didn't look very good. George Williams was back, but he can't do everything. Daryl Powell after the game seemed to be blaming on the middles. Can't change his middles. And I think if you listen to Warrington fans, you can work out which of his middles he probably should change. And he can't. A sense of entitlement.
But he can't, because 2 of their middles have gone. One of whom was allowed to go back to the NRL because apparently he was homesick, but they're on the verge of re-signing him. Can't have been that homesick. Or he's homesick.
It sounds like for Warrington.
Yeah. And the other one was perhaps getting more to the heart of what the issue is at Warrington. There was a character that maybe shouldn't have been signed anyway.
I think whoever's in charge of recruitment at Wire needs to be changed too, says Kevin. Louis, apologies, whichever one it is. Warrington needs to bring a head of rugby at the club to oversee everything from the youth to player retention and let a coach do the coaching. Chris, supported Daryl, but the demolition yesterday made his sacking the right decision. Need a dictator type, like a Ferguson, a Clough or a Shankly, who control everything and strike the fear of going to owners and players. Who's the rugby league version of Sir Alex Ferguson? Is it the guy you mentioned earlier?
2. There's one with the surname McDermott, which universally will not be liked, but look at his record, and the other would be Sean Wayne. I mean, they are the two people that if you were to get coaches who were born and bred over here and understand Super League, they should be on your list if you're seriously thinking about that. We can start talking now about what we think might be the issue with Warrington, which clearly goes a lot deeper than who is the coach, because I think last year Daryl had a plan for how he was going to change whatever this mystical notion of culture is, and he mentioned it cryptically yesterday, didn't he, in his post-match press conference, without referring to culture. He was talking about a sense of entitlement, which I think again is around this nebulous notion of whatever culture is. And he tried to get some people out of the club who he felt didn't fit his way of seeing it. Got some new people in who were more in the image of what he was trying to achieve, but some of those players that he got in are no longer there, and you'd question whether they were in fact the right sort of people if you want to change the culture. And then you look at their performances. Clearly last year was an aberration. Finishing 11th was the lowest they've ever finished in Super League, but for the fact that they were never really under pressure in terms of relegation because there was an obvious candidate. It perhaps didn't get the spotlight that it would have done under normal circumstances, because when Daryl was appointed it was clearly this is going to be the missing ingredient. The start of this season glossed over some of the issues, so 8 wins at the start, which was a club record. We've now had 6 defeats in a row, which is the worst for 20 years. But in terms of the phrase that will be used by our good friend Mr. Studd, are they not regressing to their mean at the moment? They're in the top 6. When you go from 11th, you probably are not going to win the competition. So where they are at the moment is probably where you would think they should be. It's just that the fact that they're clearly on a downward spiral that is going out of control. I think it's a lack of identity, and I think it goes a lot deeper than recruitment. I think the fact that they're still termed as wire is part of the issue. And I think it's fine for fans to hark back to that, but the club are the Wolves. In the summer era they are Warrington Wolves, in the same way that Huddersfield are Giants. They're not far down, and if you are still, even if you got a badge with both names on, if you still got it on one of your stands, who are you? What are you in this modern era? What is it you're trying to promote yourself as? Are you harking back to something because you haven't won the title for so long, or are you moving on to being something new? And trying to sell yourselves in a different manner, and the obvious corollary to that would be what Lee have done this year, who decided that when they came up into Super League they were going to be something different to the outside world. And it's been for all the we laughed and joked about how it might have been done initially, and was it even a leopard. Now how many leopard print designs are we going to be seeing at Wembley with people who can't get enough of this idea that they are the leopards? And I think again that's what comes from the top. This is who we are, this is our identity, this is what we want to believe. I saw it at Leeds in 1996. Leeds very much were anti Super League and moving to summer. They were very much had a regime that was stuck in the mud and were going nowhere. They very nearly were on the verge of bankruptcy. They very nearly had to move to Ellen Road. They had no identity. They were lost in trying to find something that was still in the past. And one thing that Gary Hetherington did, and it didn't make them a successful team, but they became the Rhinos. And everybody bought into, well, what does that mean? Who are we? What do we stand for? It's a rebrand. It's something new. It means something different. It's going to be built around kids. They're going to suddenly become no, only this club as the Rhinos. They want to see Ronnie the Rhino. It's only a little thing, but that's where culture starts, in my opinion.
No one in the South shouts liners, do they?
No, and there are some people there that would still refer
of
to
course.
loiners, and the history of the club is still built around loiners. But as a brand and what they stand for and what they represent in the city and what people see them first and foremost as, for whatever it means, is Rhinos. And that brand has now been associated, as Leopards has, with something very progressive. I think that, you know, what are Warrington? What is their identity? Who are they? What do they stand for? What is their ethic? What are the kind of players that they're trying to sign? What is the junior development that they're undertaking? How much are they going to rely upon that junior talent that they bring through and nurture and make to feel part of the club? That to me is all culture.
I mean, the Warrington fans can say if I'm being unfair, then if you say what is Warrington? So from the outside it looks like a lot of sizzle but no steak, because there's a lot of gimmicks which are fine when you're winning, but when you're not winning they look a bit daft. And we've had plenty of comments from Warrington fans. Andy and Bolton, who's not a Warrington fan, we'll come to him in a moment. Chris says the coach needs to be a proven winner, which is funny because in the press conference after the game yesterday, Daryl Powell said, I am a winner. In my career, I have been a winner as a player and as a coach. Now, people would say his record in big games at Castlewood and Featherstone doesn't necessarily bear that out, but that'd be for other people to say. Lots of problems at the club, says Chris. But if there is no respect for the coach and the players think they're bigger than him, then there is an imbalance. Absolutely, the players should be ashamed. Generally out of answers with Warrington, says Kevin. All I know is that our attitude, especially towards defence, is a joke. It's been like this for years, and that's the most important aspect of the game. They didn't defend well yesterday. And again, this is purely on numbers. So they've got at least one marquee player. I'm going to assume they're spending up to the cap.
Oh, yeah.
We know Wakefield aren't spending up to the cap. Yeah. We know that for definite. I don't know how you... Daryl Powell mentioned effort. I'm not going to question a player's effort because I've not been out there. But enthusiasm or whatever... didn't appear to be anything. I mean, there's passion from Matty Ashton shouting at his teammates, but how do you turn that around? If the players are apathetic, which seems to be one of the
if you're talking about recruitment and if you're talking about culture, then I think you've got to look at who they've recruited this year and say what kind of model are they trying to fit. So you look at a couple of those players that have come in from Australia. Why have they come in? Well, one of the reasons they've come in is because clearly their behaviour and attitude in Australia meant that their clubs wanted them to be released. Now, again, I think if you're trying to build a culture, you're trying to get those senior players to act as an influence on the younger ones in the group, you may be asking for a little bit of trouble there. That will only come home to roost if you get situations like today. I mean, people were saying at the start of the season that Paul Vaughan was the best overseas import. I think we were saying on here the other week that his form has tailed off a bit. But, you know, why was he here in the first place? Why did Catalan deem that Gil Dodson and Sam Cassiano had outlived their usefulness to Catalan?
Who are it? It's not as if they've gone from a top team to, say, a Wakefield.
Then they're not. We're not talking about their ability. Sam Cassiano's ability to release a ball in the tackle is among the best. You know, it's up there with some of the great people we've seen. But why were they being released by Catalan, who have rebuilt their? I mean, that's another team that now know what their identity is, and it's taken a while to get there, and it involves some young French players who are gaining great experience and are going to be there for a long time. But they tend to sign the sort of players. And you're now going to say, well, Tyrone May was let go from his club but I don't think he's going to be there very long. But they deemed that the contribution that had been made by those two players had reached its natural end, and they haven't exactly gone backwards with their recruitment for this year. In fact, so you've got to look at the character of the people that you're buying, not just the ability of the people that you're buying. I don't think anybody's questioning the ability of Matt Duffy when he gets it right, but I think you'd go back to how many teams did he have in the NRL, and why did those teams that he was with, who acknowledged he had great talent, think that there was something missing in his makeup that they decided that they were going to dispense with them. So again, you know, I'm not criticising them as their ability to play this sport. It's far in excess of anything we can bring to the table. But I'm talking about that combination of people and why they are on the market, and did too many of them gravitate towards Warrington?
Kevin's mentioned panic buying, and this kind of leads on to something which happened last week. So we know they've lost Josh Maguire. So that must have taken some money off the salary cap. Was he a marquee player? I don't think so.
I suspect he may have.
May have been.
Because he was an Australian and Queensland international, so he wouldn't have been cheap. But again, he didn't have many options left in Australia. His bridges had been burnt.
I'm sure they can fiddle around with their cap space. I'm assuming that Geordie Crowther coming in on whatever deal it is from Wakefield till the end of the season, because he's probably got a deal elsewhere for next. He's not taking up too much cap room if he was at Wakefield.
No.
Now,
and if it's commensurate with the number of games that are left, it still won't be very much.
Last week, Wigan, famous checkbook Wigan, get the book out. Please pay Salford Red Devils apparently £170,000 according to Kyle Amor on the telly. So I don't know where he got the number from. Someone must have told him. Why didn't Warrington go and sign Tyler Dupree? Young English player, talented, up and coming. They need middles. He's a middle. I mean, he might not want it. They might have tried. He might not want it to go. I don't know. I'm just saying, it's interesting.
I think there is a scarcity of talent in terms of, we know that our salary cap, which is a push for a lot of clubs, will not buy you very much, comparatively speaking, to the NRL salary cap or to what certain players are being paid in rugby union. That's another reason why you've got to be very careful about who you buy, but also you've got to be even more determined to develop and play your own talent, because there's no point developing it and then sending it out on loan. I mean, I think, let's use Daryl Clark as another example, who I thought when Daryl Powell came to Warrington, that would bring back Daryl Clark's very, very best form. Whether you think that Daryl Clark has played well or not this year, or up to the standard that he was at Castleford when he was Man of Steel, the truth is that St Helens, who are going to have to make the most astute of signings to replace James Roby, who are going to have to give that number 9 shirt, which is almost comes with that degree of target on your back before you put it on. They will have done a huge amount of due diligence on the person that they think is best equipped to take over from James Roby, and they've made a decision that it's not going to be Joey Lussick, who has gone back and made his debut again, the second debut for Parramatta this week. What they want is Daryl Clark, and they can see something in Daryl Clark that clearly to them is more valuable than Warrington could see in Daryl Clark to try and keep him. Now, it might be that Daryl Clark wanted the challenge. It might also be that Daryl Clark feels that the environment that he's in at the moment is not going to bring him, in the latter stage of his career, the kind of medals and glory that he's quite rightly seeking to cap what has been a brilliant career. But St Helens have obviously identified something that Warrington can't keep. Now, again, I think that's down to not necessarily the ability of the person, but what you want in your dressing room, what you're trying to build around. Now, I don't know who's going to replace Daryl Clark, but the rumour, which has been strong for most of this season, is it's probably going to be Brad Dwyer. Now, again, I don't know whether a new coach coming in at Warrington sees it the same way that perhaps Daryl did. I don't know how much of the signatures that were made at Warrington were Daryl decided he wanted those players, or it was somebody above him within the organisation. I'm not sure, from some of the traffic I've seen on the social media, that a lot of Warrington fans think Brad Dwyer is going to solve that hooking role for them.
Players never seem to improve at Warrington, says Kevin. Chris says, Warrington remind me of Man United in the 80s. Buying expensive players but only winning FA Cups and unable to win the league until Ferguson told everyone at the club what needed to be done. Due diligence on player recruitment needs to be questioned, especially from overseas. So the question is, of course, successive coaches, successive groups of players can't win the grand final, whether they're entitled to win that grand final or not. They have one league leader shields and one challenge cups. When do you look above who the coaches are and who the players are, and who makes the decision on who to employ?
Well, again, that's where I go back to trying to define what culture is, because culture comes from the very top, and that's not necessarily the person who signs the cheques, whose job it is to look after their money and make sure it's being spent wisely, but they are putting their trust in some senior management, and you have to say that they now need to decide what they want to be and how they want to get there. And it's not, I think there's been too much short-term thinking at Warrington. We need to get a group of players together that are going to do it now. We have to win it this year. Puts enormous pressure on those players, puts enormous weight of expectation on the fans, and you're not building anything. Your foundations are constantly on changing sand. Somebody needs to say, what we need to do is try and win this competition in 3 or 4 years' time when we've got a group of players that will get better. Now, what Tony Smith is doing at Hull is relatively comparable. And he went through a run of 7 games that they lost, but there was no panic. There was no whole scale, we'll deviate from our plan is we want to have a core of young players, we want to add to it with some overseas players that fit in the model of what we're trying to build. And if everybody gets better every year, at some point we'll be in a position to win. But we're not in a position now where we are and where we've been to suddenly go from, I don't know of a team in many competitions that would go for in a salary cap competition. So I'm not talking about in football where you can go out and buy whoever you want, so do a Leicester, where you go from 11th in a salary cap sport to win it. So if you were 11th last year, what was your honest expectation this year of where you were going to be and how you were going to get there? But more importantly, where are you going to be in 4 years' time? Where are you going to be in 5 years' time? Are you going to have a generation of players like St Helens have currently got that when you start winning, you'll sustain winning? Again, that Bradford had at the height of Bullmania, that it didn't happen overnight, but you can't buy it. You could when Wigan were the only full-time team and they had more internationals sat in the stand than they did on the pitch, and nobody for a while could get anywhere near it. We don't have that anymore. You have to say, how are we going to get to where we want to be over a period of time, and what's the mix of people? Toby King was in, he was out, he was happy, he wasn't happy, he was loaned out, he's going back. What does that say about the culture that's being built there? I am not sure. I suspect that it starts above the coach, and the appointment of the next coach will tell us something about whether any lessons have been learned.
Just ask Kev, Chris, any other Warrington fans. Who do you think the coach should be? I mean, does it matter? I don't know.
Who should it be and who will it be are two different things.
Who is the other Tony Smith figure then? Because obviously Tony Smith's busy, he's not coming back.
But again, it depends what you want to be, and
or are they just? Or do they just want short-term success? Do they just want to win the Super League Grand Final, put the line under "It's always your year," and then just is that all they want to do?
In which case, go out and get the best coach you can that will play you probably the most utilitarian type of rugby to win you a competition, but it won't solve your problem. Your problem is you need to build something that's sustainable, and you need to have buy-in, because some of the guys who are on the pitch were once on the terraces, and they feel whatever that Warrington, Josh Thewlis, who has come through the amateur game in Warrington, understands why it's important for him to pull on that Warrington shirt. That's what you've got to harness. Not signing Australian players who were only ever going to play 3 games, even though they're big names. Because it doesn't get you anywhere. So do you go for... I mean, clearly everybody's talking about Justin Holbrook, and he understands the competition, and he knows what it would take, but he still needs to be given the raw material. And at St Helens had that core of junior players who were going to be influenced by somebody like Justin Holbrook to achieve their potential, and he added to them that was the core base ingredient. He added to them people who could then elevate them to the next level. People like Jack Wellesby were already in that system. Who are the Warrington players that are in the system at the moment that you're going to build a team around?
Nicholson, Walker, is that it?
Nicholson, who came from Wigan,
and Walker came from
Widnes.
Well, that's been a long.
But that's where you start. We're just finishing off a book with a well-known rugby league player, which will be out in September, who was involved in one of the teams we've already mentioned tonight, who did have some success, but it wasn't sustainable. And it wasn't sustainable because when you start reading what was in the dressing room at the time, It was a group of players who were good enough to go out and win something, but it wasn't a culture that was good enough to sustain that. And things like cup victories come with the luck of the draw. So you've still got to win it on the day, but you only have to win 4 games, and your route to the final is tailored for you. You know, and sometimes you don't have to play all the big teams, or you only have to get up every four times, and you've won a trophy. That is not the same as week in, week out grind, 27 weeks, getting to the end of the season, and then being in a position to win the playoffs. That's a different kind of togetherness. And that's where I think it begins and ends with Warrington. I genuinely think that it's not about Daryl Powell, it's not about who they're signing, it's about who they want to be, who they are, and how honest they are with their fans to say, we cannot have overnight success. But again, we need to hear from people who support Warrington to say if this is nonsense or...
Louis says, when Tony Smith came in at the Y, he didn't buy loads of superstars. First thing he did was let players go who were not willing to step up to the plate. I like Daryl Powell, but his old school coaching upset players. Kevin says, rumours today, Justin Holbrook, but he's been lined up, or linked rather, with Newcastle Knights.
Yeah, they've said that they're sticking with Adam O'Brien. So
he's definitely
if Holbrook was going to go, it would be as an assistant where Brian McDermott is. I mean, I think, again, if they're going to be linked with... You know, Flanagan, Seabold, whoever normally is rolled, somebody who is an assistant coach.
All the people on the articles that were out when whoever the last Super League coach left, they've just taken off one name and added another one.
If it was me, and again, we need to be told by the Warrington fans what they think. You know, they may want Justin Holbrook. They may think because he's won things with St Helens, he's immediately come in with a winning formula, and that's going to work at Warrington. It's about the cattle that you've got. I would reinvent myself and do everything I can to not only give him the job, but give him the time and the desire to recruit in the manner that he wants to do the job. And I'd spend the king's ransom on getting Lee Breers, because I think he is Mr. Warrington.
Chris says, togetherness is a great way to describe what we are not. Badger, mushroom, says, Powell was unfortunately just a fall guy. The ones who are making the signings and in turn setting the culture, the ones to blame and should be out of a job. Repeated failure. Kevin says, feel sorry for the youngsters, threw in a losing team with a poor attitude and culture and wonder why they don't make it.